We developed the Digital Fashion Group in order to focus on what was happening in the fashion industry and what was happening in fashion academia. And the purpose really was to look at digital transformation in the industry and in education, and to bring a new perspective about the position of the creative being at the center of the data dialogue. And really, that's what we focused on in our 4 years of development so far. We spent the first year and a half researching, investigating, and understanding what was happening in digital fashion in both education and the industry. We spoke to many, many people in the industry, many, many people in academia to understand the position at that point in time. So we became really informed as to what was happening in the industry. And that then informed what we were going to do in terms of delivering a product. That product that we started off with was a course called Digital Fashion 101, which is talking about the mindset of people in fashion at that point in time. And this was 2 years or so ago when we launched that. And looking at the digital mindset that was required in the fashion industry for digital transformation in order to impact on how things were developing in the industry, from how a designer works in the studio through to how the clothes are produced at the end, or how clothes are even returned, was one of the key things that we considered and looked at. And so we became really, really informed on what was happening in the industry. And our mindset course really started to deliver aspects of what was happening in the industry with a view to considering what you need to do, how you need to position yourself, what you need to understand, what you need to look for, and where you're going to go with digital transformation in fashion. We built on that by developing our skills course, which is based on using Clo 3D, which we call 3 Design, the Fundamentals of Digital Fashion Design. And this was aimed at actually delivering digital transformation skills to the fashion designer, whether they are a recent designer or somebody with 30 years experience. Anybody who wanted to retrain or look at new ways of developing and designing product in fashion. So we developed a 6-unit course using Clo, using highly experienced instructors, using our learn by doing technique. And we've delivered that along with other mindset courses to over 13,000 people to date.